Boss Rush Video Game Book Club is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our family of podcasts, head on over to patreon.com/bossrushmedia to see which tier is right for you. Thanks for your continued support.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Boss Rush Book Club, a place where we can play and read better, or play and read games and be better. I think that's how it goes. I don't know. I'm your host, Patrick, and with me is my favorite co-host and author, Stephanie Klimov. How you doing, Stephanie?
Hey, I'm here to talk about an amazing game in a franchise that I've missed out on a lot, so I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited you're here too. I was afraid that I was going to be doing this solo.
No, never.
Mm-hmm. And luckily, we found the only other person who's ever beaten this game. Please welcome Block from Block Reviews Games.
Block's Gaming Reviews.
Sorry.
Get it right, Patrick. Gosh.
No one will ever find me.
Block's Gaming Reviews.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Quick plug for Block, though. If you guys haven't, Block, maybe at the end of the podcast, please, tell us where people can follow you. I know I've listened and watched things that Block's done, and not only are they, reviews and stuff, but they're also very comical. Block's a funny dude.
I try.
Yeah, we enjoy the insights.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate it.
So as I mentioned, this is the Boss Rush Book Club. It is a awesome thing that we provide to you guys, our Patreon listeners, once a month, where we go deep in depth into a video game that has recently come out or something that maybe you guys recommended. This time, though, we are going to be talking about Final Fantasy XVI. And there is a lot to kind of dive into and just kind of talk about this game. We are trying to do a slightly different format here instead of kind of going by the events, and playing it that way. We're actually going to try and hit more focused topics, but of course we don't want to leave any of you listeners, if you haven't played this game, feel free to check it out, but just know that there are going to be heavy spoilers.
Spoiler warning. Warning.
So
warning.
Play the game if you want to. If not, stay tuned. And yeah. So, let's talk a bit about the plot of Final Fantasy XVI. Stephanie, you just recently came off of this game, and I see that you have a bit of a synopsis that you'd like to share. So I was hoping maybe you could share it with us.
Yeah, I really needed it because even though I've beaten the game, it throughout the game, it took me a while to kind of catch on to a lot of the political events in there. So, for those that don't know, but Final Fantasy XVI was released, was it June or July of this year, 2023?
It was June 22nd, I believe.
Second, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, I don't want to open up another window because I'm afraid Zencaster will crash. And made by Square-Enix. So, Final Fantasy XVI is set in a fictional world called Valisthea, and there are two continents named Ash and Storm, and they contain magic crystals called Mother Crystals. Pat, you want to take over just for a second?
Yep. All right. So, in this land of Valisthea, there are there are more than 5 crystals. They're called Mother Crystals. They're about the size of mountains and such.
Oh, yeah.
And they provide the world with magical powers. So we know that there are people who are blessed with magic, and these guys are called bearers. And then there's people who are not blessed with magic, and these are just your ordinary citizens. The bearers tend to be the 10% of population that actually has the ability to use magic. The rest of the people have to use crystals that are mined from the Mother Crystals to be able to perform it. Mm-hmm. You play as Clive. He is a prince of a nation called Rosalia, and he is gifted in magic, but he is not. He unfortunately was not chosen to be a dominant, which is a person who's able to hold the power of a very powerful being, almost like a godlike person.
Mhm.
And the kingdom or the dukedom of Rosalia worshipped or is blessed by the Phoenix, an icon called Phoenix. Right, Steph?
That is correct. Much to the chagrin of his mother, Annabelle, which we'll talk about at length. And she also has another son, Joshua. So in this flashback back then, Joshua is a child that's very sickly. I'm not sure what the sickness is, but it's a very delicate child. And Clive, because he's kind of looked down upon by the mother, he ends up being a shield for Joshua, or a bodyguard. And Clive trains with all the rest of the soldiers. And you can tell that Clive is well liked by everybody. Joshua looks up to him. Clive has a friend that you kind of get a sense that will be a possible love interest named Jill. Jill is a ward in the Rosaria family. So all leading up to this event where Joshua needs to manifest the Phoenix at Phoenix Gate. That's a place. But unfortunately, there was an ambush at Phoenix Gate, and many people were massacred, killed, including Clive and Joshua's father. Joshua ends up triggered by this, transforms into the Phoenix, and then Clive doesn't know it, but Clive ends up transforming into another icon of fire, Ifrit, which is almost like a dog-like demon dog type animal. And you engage in a icon fight between the two, and unfortunately, Ifrit kills the Phoenix, which is a little bit of irony, because Clive is not aware of what he has done. He only wakes up and understands that someone has killed Joshua, and he's going to spend the rest of his life avenging his brother's death to find out who's done that. So fast forward. Clive ends up working. He's branded for the Sambrek. Am I pronouncing that right?
The
Sambrek soldiers, and he is scouting with some other soldiers to observe.
They have the mission to kill the dominant of Shiva.
Right, Shiva, which ends up being Jill. So as soon as Clive realizes it's Jill, he deserts the army and stays with Jill, and he actually runs into another main character named Sid. So, and again, we'll go into characters later. Sid has this grand vision, and he has a hideaway where people can live and die on their own terms. And that's a saying because the bears around the two continents are oppressed, and they take in any bears that either manage to escape or run away. Kind of trying to speed forward a little, Clive eventually learns through a battle with an antagonist, Benedicta, who has the icon Garuda. That's where of wind, correct. That's around the time where he discovers that he was Ifrit and killed Joshua. He has a bit of a crisis, understandably so. But Sid kind of, talks him off the ledge, so to speak, and just, kind of asks him to just keep searching, keep trying to understand the situation. And in the meantime, Clive, Jill, and Sid and team have decided that they need to destroy the nation's mother crystals.
Mm-hmm. Yep, Sid brings it to their attention that the mother crystal is what's causing this natural disaster called the Blight. Mm-hmm. It is what absolutely drying the lands complete of life. Nothing can live there. Nothing can grow there. Everything is basically poisonous, and you can't even use magic in blighted lands unless you have crystals, or you're an icon or dominant. So that Sid's grand plan is to rid the world of these mother crystals, and they decide they want to take the first, or start their journey to destroy the first one over in the Sambrekian army, or Sambrecht's kingdom.
That's where we have an introduction of another antagonist, or soon-to-be antagonist, in typical Final Fantasy fashion, because there's never just one bad guy or bad person. Some odd, ethereal-looking face with blank eyeballs pops out of the Mother Crystal.
Don't forget, naked, veiny, pale, and with 4 arms.
4 arms. Yep, there's just a lot to this individual. And unfortunately, this is where, Cid tries to, protect Clive and everyone. And despite Cid summoning his icon, is it Rama? I'm not sure if I'm... Ramu? Rama of Thunder.
Right.
And unfortunately, Cid dies in the process. And Clive, over the span of time, I think the story jumps 5 years, that Clive takes over Cid's namesake and kind of oversees the hideaway.
So, skip ahead 5 years. They are going around and trying to liberate bearers from the Republic of
Dhalmekia?
Dhalmekia, the Dhalmekian Republic.
And I don't know if it was mentioned that the bearers become slaves to all of these nations, and it's seen in that way in that you have normal humans that do normal human things. They can't use magic without the crystals, and all of that. But people that are born with that magic, they are much more powerful in that they can shoot fireballs, they can cause wind, they can do these magical abilities, but every time that they use magic, it drains their bodies, their life essence, just as the mother crystals are draining the life from the world. The bearers, named that way because of a brand on their neck, and they're bearing this this brand that signifies that they're magic users. It's draining their life force. And so what happens is that each of these kingdoms, most of them anyway, it gets a little foggy in Rosaria and how they use them. But essentially, the normal humans who feel threatened by these bearers will use them to, will push them to use their magic as much as they can. And then when they die at an early age, most of them, they're tossed away. They become petrified, and they're just tossed. And most of them don't think of bearers as human, which gets into a lot of slave and racial tensions that we have in the real world. It becomes an analogy for that. And that's also why Annabella, the Queen of Rosaria, feels this way about Clive. She's very, quote unquote, racist in her thoughts that these bearers are beneath humanity, that they're cursed in a way, that he's not good enough to be the dominant, a blessing. He only has a small fraction of power in her view. And so she thinks of her son as very just unworthy of the crown, unworthy of her love, unworthy of rights of humanity. And that's in part of Cid's mission, and what Clive gets brought into is almost an underground railroad of rescuing and liberating these bearers, but also in a grander scheme, as you've already said, liberating everybody from this crutch of magic, that people shouldn't rely on the mother crystals, on magic, on dominance. Sorry, I
No,
thought
it's-
that was
thank you
important
for
to
bringing that up.
understand that next part.
Oh, it really is, and I just kind of find it ironic. Again, more contributes way more on why I hated Annabella so much, is because like, all right, B, like you look down on one of your sons because he's more of a bear type, and she favors Joshua because he's supposed to be the actual Phoenix, but yet she ain't got no power herself. So,
But she's got the blood.
I
She is
know.
the definition of one of those snobby nobles that are very stereotypical. Like in her mind, like it's okay. Well, this game does borrow themes from Game of Thrones as well as other medieval times where if you were noble, you tended to intermarry with your family so that you can keep your blood as pure as possible. And later in history, we find out that's actually making your blood a lot weaker, which could be one of the reasons why Joshua was always a sickly child, is because the king or the Duke of Rosalia or
Rosaria. Yeah.
Rosaria, and the Duchess Queen, the Duchess Annabella, they're actually cousins.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And not that this fully fits right now, but to your point, Stephanie, on that, the irony of that, and I wrote this in my initial notes, is similar to the irony of Hitler, in that Germans, purebred Germans, the greatest race as he would think of it, would be blonde hair and blue-eyed and very big, and he's not that. And
it's actually a pretty good like comparison that you just drew. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep. So back onto the history here.
Before you continue, Pat, sorry to interrupt. I did forget to add a very important detail at the closing before the 5-year jump, because while everything's happening, this creature, later to be named Ultima, is just trying to. Basically, he's like trying to inhabit Clive. Like he's seeing Clive as a vessel. This is the first that we're going to hear about that, but we're going to hear much more about it later. Out comes someone that looks a lot like Joshua, has the powers of a phoenix like Joshua, and he captures, jails Ultima in his chest, which hopefully you guys can help me understand later. Oh no, I think I get it. But anyway.
I think you might understand.
Yeah, no, I get it now. But yeah, so and then like Clive kind of sees it, but he's a little out of it. Just so we now see Joshua's not actually dead, which I don't know how that happened, but he's not dead.
The Phoenix rises.
Yeah. All right, Pat.
I mean, truth be told, we saw the Phoenix get defeated, and even though we saw the neck get snapped, we never actually see Joshua himself, turn to stone, which is what happened to people like Benedicta and a few of the other dominants that get defeated. So Joshua's alive, and now Clive kind of has an understanding that Joshua is not dead. So he
gets a feather of the Phoenix.
Yep, the Phoenix down.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Or Phoenix.
Do you get that reference, Stephanie?
Mm-hmm.
I know you've only played 10 and 10-2?
10 and 10-2.
Yeah.
Yep. No, Phoenix down is a feather.
Yeah.
So that's
or an item.
Yeah,
that'll resurrect you.
That resurrects people in Final Fantasy games, which this game actually doesn't have any because
there's no items.
Yeah.
There's a few.
And if Clive dies, then that's it. Game over. All right. So 5 years. 5 years later, a bad guy named Hugo Kolpka has been going on a rampage trying to find Sid because he believes Sid is responsible for the death of Benedicta, which is the general that had the Garuda power, who is also the lover of Hugo. And as a lot of other people, the lover of Sid.
Former lover of Sid and of Barnabas.
Barnabas, yep.
Clive was going to be the Wednesday boy, and if she could have had him, yeah, she got around.
She got around, yeah.
So Hugo's going around and trying to find his Sid, which is now Clive. Eventually, he understands that, or he learns through Annabella that that Sid is Clive, and so to get Clive into a trap, he attacks Rosaria and forces Clive to go back and try and save his homeland. There, Clive and Sid do a great big battle, and not Clive and Sid.
Hugo.
Hugo.
Thank you. Clive and Hugo, Clive who is Sid, fights Hugo in this grand old battle. It's a pretty awesome battle, using icon abilities, but not actually using icons. But then it ends with Clive cutting both of Hugo's hands off.
Mm-hmm. And Hugo throwing a massive temper tantrum, and then is carried away by some soft-spoken, gray-haired, silver-haired person. I'm like, all right, cool.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, with that done, they decide to continue on their journey in destroying these mother crystals. So they go to the Iron Kingdom and take care of the one that is representative of fire. And that's where we get to learn a little bit of Jill and her situation between the sacking of Rosaria and to the point where Clive frees her from her servitude as dominant.
Mm-hmm.
We learned that the Iron Kingdom is not a very good place, especially if you're a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, they decide to go and take care of the crystal that represents the Earth, which is where Hugo has his little fortress.
His bachelor pad.
Yep, his fancy bachelor pad inside of a mountain, and it's there where Clive and Jill both. No, not Jill. Jill actually isn't part of that one.
Yeah, she's recovering.
Mm-hmm.
That's right, because Hugo did bad to Jill. Anyways, so Clive goes and he fights Hugo again, but this time it is a battle of icons, and so we get our next major icon versus icon, Ifrit versus Titan, which we will most likely talk about here a little bit later. Just point is, Ifrit wins, Titan is destroyed, Hugo is dead.
And side note, what I did not understand why this was happening for the longest time, but as these events are occurring while you're playing through these missions, you also kind of have a secondary story occurring. A lot of times it flips to meanwhile in the Holy Empire of Sambrek. Like, you've got this king and, oh, hello, Annabella, you're here now with this child, which makes me queasy because the child's just like, I don't know, too young to be just so attached to mom. Like, it's just a little unsettling.
Breastfeeding at his age.
Yeah, so there's this kid that's very...
And it's like in Game of Thrones, and I've just forgot her name, but...
Cersei?
No. Oh. It's... The sister,
the crazy sister with the tower and
Ares.
Yeah, because she breastfeeds in the book. She breastfeeds up until he's a teenager. But it's a very almost immediately that comes to mind if you're familiar with Game of Thrones.
Yes, thank you. So that's what I thought of.
Extremely coddled.
Yes, and he's also holding a doll that's has very suspiciously blue glowing eyes. The king also has a son, Dion, and he is usually found in the battlefield, and he is the icon of light. I believe it is. Hold on. It's a dragon.
You got it.
Help. Oh my gosh.
King of dragons.
Bahamut. Bahamut, yes. I should have known that. He's like one of my favorite, but like Bahamut. So it's just little snippets of like what's going on that side. Annabella wants to just it's called a culling, like just kill off all the bears. Dion is kind of not really trusting this lady, and he's starting to see his father kind of not behave like himself, kind of falling a little bit more of the direction of what the mother and the son supposedly want, which we'll get more details later. But back to you, Pat.
Mm-hmm. And this also just happens to be, these people just happen to be in the city where the next crystal is, because the original crystal in Sandbreck, after it got destroyed, they decided to wage war with another city, and they win and they take it over, and now they have their kingdom there. So you go in search of this for the next crystal. Of course, there's some stories, kind of like filler stories going on, particularly about Sid's daughter and trying to build a ship. And
Mid.
yeah, good old Mid. We love Mid, but that story was 100% wholly unnecessary.
Yes.
It was filler.
Yeah. Just so that you can finally get to the point where you're at the... I'm trying to find out what this kingdom's name is.
So, are you thinking of Waylude?
Not Waylude.
The Crystalline Dominion?
Crystallized.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Crystallized Dominion, which is where the next crystal that they're going for. So they go straight over there, and Dion also has made a plot to... he realizes that his father's not himself, and that the only way to keep the people alive and prevent his father from needlessly sacrificing many and millions, as well as... Because his father wants to, like, oh, we have to call this land over here and call that one over here. And Dion's like, no, they surrendered. We don't need to do that. So Dion decides he's going to usurp the throne. And he goes and he starts attacking, but he also loses control. And Bahamut no longer is attacking strategic targets. He's actually trying to destroy the entire crystallized dominion. So enter Ifrit again, who's going to go and beat some sense into Bahamut. But
Well,
he's not...
and on that, I don't know if you were going to, because you don't know this at the time, that he was originally going to kill just one person,
Mm-hmm.
which was the new emperor, Olivier, who was Annabella's and the emperor's son.
So his half brother.
Yeah, his younger half brother.
But yeah, Joshua also happens to be over here at the Crystallized Dominion too, because he's been trying to get a hold of Dion to try and warn him about the plot of the ultimate evil, or the ancient evil Ultima, which he'll appear here very shortly. But we get to see this awesome icon battle, not only with Ifrit and Bahamut, but Phoenix with Ifrit fighting Bahamut
In space.
in this big old thing that would make even Dragon Ball Z, applaud.
Every modern Final Fantasy goes to space for a moment. And they had to slide this one in.
Yep.
They're in space now for a moment.
We're not sure how they're breathing up there, but you know what? They had to do it because of like super lasers that Bahamut had and stuff like that. But hey, they finally managed to beat down Bahamut. They just whittle him down enough to kind of wear him out, so he's not turning to stone because he lost. But then they find Olivier and Annabelle in the destroyed ruins of the Crystallized Dominion, and Clive and Joshua reveal to Annabelle, but hey, we're both still alive, and Annabelle kind of freaks the fuck out.
Well, and Annabella she knew that Clive was to a point, because she spared his life at Rosaria. They were going to kill him, and she has him turn into a bearer. And she later finds out through Hugo that he is actually Sid. So she had a good idea that he was still living, but had no idea about Joshua.
Yep. And Dion walks in during the family reunion and sees Olivier, but he doesn't see Olivier as Olivier. He sees him as Ultima, and so he throws his spear and pierces Olivier, who burns up in a black flame. So it proves that Olivier really wasn't human at that point. Well, then then of course Annabelle freaks out about this and decides rather than, deal with any of this anymore, she just kills herself. Anticlimactically.
Just gotta take the easy way out.
Yep. And at this point, everyone retreats back to the hideout, including Dion, who's greatly injured but still alive. They decide Clive and Jill and Joshua all decide to take him to the hideout. It is at this point that Ultima decides to enact his great plan, and he covers the world in darkness.
Mm-hmm.
That's his great plan.
Which it's still light outside.
It's light.
It's like Twilight.
But
yeah, it's like Twilight.
Not
the
the
sun is
vampire.
missing, though.
Yeah.
You become sparkly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's unnerving, and people it's also causing this ether that's been kind of rising up from the crystals. It's now out of control, and so these things called floods are happening, and people breathe in or get touch this ether, they instantly kind of turn into these monstrous creatures. What do they call them? They are archaic.
I forget.
They're almost the Akashic.
Akashic, thank
They
you.
remind me a lot of the White Walkers, and I'm sorry, I will and can be making Game of Thrones references. I feel like that's thrown around a lot, but
It's appropriate.
It is.
It's
The developer, the producer, made everyone in that team watch Game of Thrones and used inspirations from
there you
it.
go. So
There's a lot of dark fantasy elements. Mostly Game of Thrones, but a little bit of The Witcher, a little bit of Dragon Age, a few other more modern dark fantasy elements, but definitely Game of Thrones.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, Ultima wants his body. He wants Clive as a vessel, and so he sends his
So it's everyone playing the game, by the way.
Yeah, everyone wants Clive for his body. And those pecs. Those beautiful, beautiful man boobs that he has. Yeah.
well, I don't know. We could go on a debate, but I would prefer a different individual. But we can talk about that with favorite characters.
Okay. So he sends off his right hand, Barnabas, who you've learned that knows all about Ultima and is in fact serving Ultima. The continent of that he's from, the continent of Ash.
Ash, sorry.
Are fervent worshippers of Ultima. And so now you have a job to get over to the continent of Waloed and destroy the last crystal that's remaining, because you feel that by destroying the crystals, Ultima will lose. He needs those crystals for something. Then we get to when we're about ready to launch a ship, we get into a really awesome battle between Shiva. You run into the white-haired guy. You learn that is Sleipnir, which is Odin's right hand, or his horse, even though it's his horse in human form. And that Sleipnir is not actually a real human being. He can be duplicated as many times as Barnabas wants. So anyways, there's a cool fight with that. But then Barnabas comes out and he starts fighting, and they're on a very unwinnable fight because he has a sword that can literally rip through anything. Time, space, oceans, Shiva. He fights Shiva and Shiva loses. And therefore is captured. And that leads us to a great ocean battle where Clive eventually rescues Jill and fights Barnabas at the bottom of the freaking ocean, because Barnabas split the ocean with his damn blade.
Moses.
Yeah, it's like this is just a sign of just how freaking powerful Barnabas is that he was able to do this.
Right, and isn't this the fight that you lose no matter what?
Yes.
You lose this fight. This is Barnabas is a little bit too much for you, and so he's kind of done toying around, and he decides to close the ocean. So he gets away, or he flies away with his flying, galloping horse, because he's also Odin. While you have to run and try and beat the waves to the coast, but then Jill wakes up her Shiva powers again and freezes the ocean that's coming around, giving you at least a passage to the nearby coastlands. But needless to say, they're both very cold and wet, so they decide they need to dry their clothes by a fire
Naked.
and use each other for warmth.
Can I just tell you, I was impressed how long they were naked together before they even made out. I'm like, what? These two beautiful young human beings went this long without doing it when they were right. I don't know.
I would have been hitting it in the first second.
I was like, well, here we are.
And to think that they've probably been together for they've been together now for at least 5 years, and they still, this is probably the slowest relationship that you could possibly see. They were both pining for each other, and yet neither of them refused to make their move.
I was under the impression, and I'll get to this later, I think, but that they kind of were in a relationship, but they don't do a good job of ever really establishing where they are, because they're already saying very lovey-dovey things to each other up to that point. But
I felt like they were close, but I feel like they weren't together. They've never done it.
Yeah, it's hard to pinpoint that relationship. But
yeah, there was a scene eons ago in the game where they were lying down looking at the sky, and there was this awkward pause where they were thinking about if they should kiss, but then they didn't. So, but I mean,
and don't forget the doctor's office too, when they were thinking about kissing, and then Gav walks in and stops it because Gav obviously was jealous and wanted Clive all to himself.
Yes.
wouldn't.
But I will say,
man boobs.
I appreciate them taking romance slow, generally speaking. But by then, again, if you're just chilling out on a secluded beach naked, let's go. Anyway.
Let's warm up here. In other ways, right? Yeah, plus Clive had his fire magic. He could have done that at any time, but no. He purposely made sure that they were both naked. Plans. That's my man, Clive. Anyways, they get found the next day, and they start a plan to get to the actual crystal, which you wander through the kingdom of Walud, and finally you breach the kingdom. You find out everyone's basically been a Keshik at this point on the kingdom. Everyone, there's not really a single soul left on the entire continent. There are a few, but they're mainly in side quests. Yeah. And there's a pregnant woman that Gav kind of gets attached to.
I know, it's kind of random, but it's all good.
You know what? Gav needed a significant other at this point. If you're going to keep Gav around, at least give him someone to love. Everyone else has one. Give Gav one.
Yeah.
Even if she's pregnant with someone else's kid.
Well, that's also like Game of Thrones.
Yep.
With Samwell Tarly.
That's right. Gav is Samwell.
Oh, wow.
So anyways, Kingdom Walud, you get to the crystal. Before you get to the crystal, Barnabas traps you kind of in the center of the continent, and you actually are forced to fight him in a battle that doesn't actually really use icons. It's more of a sword-to-sword battle. Icons are briefly used, but it's mostly you versus Barnabas in Odin armor.
It's like almost Odin armor, because they have like where they prime themselves, and then they become full icons, and so he's like primed, but he doesn't. He rarely becomes full Odin, and then it's a quick time event when he is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but other than that, he still has the black sword of Odin, which can literally cut through anything. But you win.
Yeah.
You beat him, and he's like, "Okay, I think you're ready for my master now." And so you go to the Kingdom of Walud, finally find the crystal. You're attacked by a whole bunch of Akashic, and out pops every hero, in existence to come and save you. Dion, Jill, Gav, a whole bunch of other people like your uncle, your crazy
Oh, I
uncle.
love that uncle. Uncle Byron.
Uncle Byron. Yep. And so they're distracting the Akashic, and you go and open up the door just to find Ultima standing right there, and he warps you right into the crystal. That way he can tell you his history of where he comes from and why you're important to his plan. So to quickly
just laying on the exposition really hard there. Like it's like a Bond villain. Like, let me tell you my master plan before I kill you, Mr. Bond.
Before I take over your body and do whatever I want with it.
Ooh.
Yeah, we all know Ultimate shipping for Clive as well. Everyone was. That's the thing about these Square games is everyone's thirsting for the main villain or for the main character.
Everyone's just so pretty.
Yeah, they are beautiful.
Ultima's like
not an ugly person
except for Ultima, maybe.
Except for Ultima, they made him personally ugly, all white and veiny and bony and
great abs.
Although, like in the final fight, when he is more.
He's more beautiful in the final.
It's almost like Sephiroth beautiful, almost not as beautiful.
Yeah, I got a theory behind that.
Ooh, okay.
But yeah, he goes over to
Malleus is his name there.
Yep. He goes. He explains that he is actually God. That he wasn't pretending. He actually is God. He created the humans. He originally landed onto this. We found this land because his people destroyed their own land. They were suffering from a blight as well, and so they found the perfect land, Valistea, and he planted crystals so that this untamed land of ether could finally, like all the ether would go into the crystals, and the land would become perfect. And then he created humans so that they would continue to cultivate the land, and eventually one would become strong enough to be his body. Because he had to, when they left the land, they had to forego his body.
Right. And it had something to do with, because this whole time, Clive was absorbing the powers of every icon that he had come across. So he had a little bit of Garuda, a little bit of the others, Bahamut, Titan, Shiva, exactly. And I think this vessel is to prove that he can handle casting a massive spell.
Yeah, because Ultima is a god, and he needs to be sure that if he puts his power into a human, that the human isn't going to turn to stone absolutely immediately.
Right.
Because of the overwhelming power. So that is why he's sent Clive to go and destroy the crystals and to gather all these powers, is to make sure that Clive was ready. Clive, of course, refuses. This pisses off Ultima and is like, well, I will take you by force then. You fight him, you win, you destroy the crystal, you think Ultima is completely gone, but no, he's not. He's very much well alive. You very much completed his plan, and then he goes back to the destroyed Magic Dominion and raises it up to the sky and creates a gigantic floating crystal up there
called the Origin.
Called the Origin Crystal. and it's really like sucking all the ether out of it's accelerated the blight like 100-fold.
Right. And this is essentially the end game, so to speak. It's the, well, you better do everything you want to do before you go up there, because once you go up there, it kind of unleashes those final chain of events.
That point of no return that luckily games are now warning you before you reach it. So at this point, you could do a whole bunch of side quests, which flesh out the rest of the characters out there. But then you as in Clive, Joshua, and Dion are chosen to be the final party, mostly because Dion can fly with his Bahamut powers. And they decide to go fly up to the crystal, leaving Jill, Gav, and all the rest of the people behind. We get a touching farewell among all the main characters, who are all kind of standing around, being like, "Okay, this is your final battle. You know, make sure you come home alive." And the one with Jill is very touching. Like they put their foreheads together and they admit each other that they love each other.
Ugh, about time. Gosh.
And then Clive promises that he'll return to her.
Then they have sex right in front of everybody.
Yes, they do. No, they don't. And so then they all decide to do the dramatic leap off balcony, where then Dion turns into a Bahamut and they like fly off to the origin.
Imagine if they would like messed Bahamut at that moment. I thought that. Like,
they fall into black water and probably be dead.
they die. You know, Dion's like, "Oh shit, I missed."
Yeah. That's the Fantasy VII death song.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, they fly to the origin crystal. We get the really cool cinematics of Bahamut fighting 1 billion Akashic flying enemies that Origin spews out. And then they go into Origin, see the floating city. They have a fight with Ultima in his icon form, which looks like Ifrit. It's a black Ifrit with wings. And the battle leaves Dion gravely wounded. Dion pulls off one last attempt, injures Ultima, gets Clive and Joshua to safety, and then falls to his death.
He says, "Father, it is done."
Just
Peace
like
out.
Jesus Christ. He has been redeemed. And then we get a whole bunch of fights with Ultima. Again, kind of goes back into his whole spew of like, you know, this is how everything is. You know, this is what's going to happen. We find out that Ultima is not just one, but he is like 8 different forms of himself, including the one that's in Joshua's chest. That is why Ultima can exist and still be in Joshua at the same time.
Oh man.
Each mother
Legion.
each mother crystal had its own version of Ultima in it. So he absorbs all those forms, including the one in Joshua's chest, which rips out of Joshua, leaving him mortally wounded. And you know, but not before Joshua passes on the Phoenix icon over to Clive, so that he can be Ifrit. I think Ifrit Reborn or Ifrit. I forget
Risen?
what. Thank you, Ifrit Risen.
Yeah.
This is why we keep you around, Steph, because you have all the answers.
Random answers, anyway.
Yep. And then we fight a practically hour-long battle.
Pretty much.
First, Ultima.
And it's like 5,000 forms.
Perfect form, and now he's beautiful. He's got golden hair, and like his muscles are even bigger now, and
like floating shoulder pads or whatever they were,
with like wings on them. And you fight that form, and then he goes back into his Ifrit form again, and you're like literally fighting in like the space time, and like every single attack could probably destroy a galaxy. That, you know, you're each like throwing at each other. Like it's like
Oh yeah.
Televisions explode.
it's
The
literally
PlayStation 5 catches on fire.
attacks a Big Bang.
It's a lot of colors. Whew.
It was a very wonderful spectacle. And then once you do that, he gets into one more final form, but it's like his old form, but this time he has a helmet in it, which somehow makes him more powerful. But he, this version of Ultimus,
Ultimalius.
Ultimalius, thank you. He uses each one of the icon abilities, and so you kind of he rotates through those abilities for the first third, then he rotates another 3 abilities for the second third, and then for the final third, it's just strictly Phoenix and Ifrit abilities that he uses, and then you finally beat him. He's like absolutely shocked. Like this is finally the one time Ultimus shows any emotion, because he's as like emotionless as a computer. Like he's a very bland spoken villain, except
very very alien, otherworldly, and like you said, kind of robotic.
Yeah.
The lack of emotion and things, I think it certainly goes to show how inhuman he is.
Mm-hmm. But you finally land the finishing blow, and Clive decides to take, like, Ultimus leaves with the final threat that nothing's changed. You know, I may be dead, but your world's also dead as well. So Clive takes in Ultima's ability. So instead of Ultima controlling Clive, it's now Clive controlled Ultima. But at that moment, he realizes that his body is not strong enough to contain Ultima. So it would have been interesting to see if Ultima did actually succeed in Clive. Would Ultima have actually gotten anywhere with it? Because Clive's body is immediately failing. So he takes two. He does 2 things quick. First, he heals Joshua using the abilities that he got from Ultima. He revives the wounds, because I guess Joshua wasn't fully dead yet, just mortally wounded. And then he uses the power of Ultima and destroys the Origin Crystal, and thereby reverting the whole, like, literally destroying magic altogether.
And I took it that he had the full power of the Phoenix at that point of all the icons, and so that way he was able to fully bring Joshua, but he could probably bring anybody back. But he only has the power, the energy, to kind of do it once. He can't do too much. So.
Yeah, the power was already eating inside him. He basically used like a full blast of everything he had to destroy the Origin Crystal, and then we see the next scene is him washing up to the beach. You're like, oh hey, he is alive. That's cool. But then you see his hand, like, is petrified, and you just see him lying there, like,
staring at the moon.
Staring at the moon that he promised to see with Jill. And the petrification is eventually gonna take him. Then it flips over to the hideaway where we see Jill. Jill all of a sudden gets that understanding that Clive is no longer there. She breaks down, runs kind of more to a secluded area where Torgal meets her and, kind of comforts her. And then we get the credits.
And then there's an after credits scene.
Yes.
So then there's a post credits scene where you have these 2 children that kind of look like Clive and Joshua. Not exactly, but one's older with dark hair, one's younger with blonde hair. And they're playing out in their yard. And they're kind of reenacting parts of the game where one is Ifrit and one's Phoenix. And they kind of kick a ball or throw a ball and it bounces into their house, and their mom is there. She's cooking, and the older one runs in, and she asks him to light the fire on the stove, and she hands him a stone. And you would think from playing the game that she's handed him part of a crystal, which he will use the crystal, the magic within the crystal to light the fire. But instead, he does it the old-fashioned way of hitting it and
it was
creating fire without magic. And he mentions, he's like, it'd be so much easier if I had the magic of the icon, sort of Ifrit or whichever. And the mom's like, those silly stories that you're reading, like magic's not real, And he runs back out, and we see a book on the table that he's been reading, and it's just simply titled Final Fantasy, and it's written by Joshua Rossfield. And so it leaves you with two questions. Either the entire game is fiction, that it's fiction within the game, and it exists solely as this book, and all of that, or most likely, I think, is that when Joshua was resurrected by Clive, he chronicled everything as like a history within the book. But now it's been so long that we no longer, the people no longer know of that lost history, that the lost history of the world has become fantasy. It's become fiction, which, it kind of echoes to how in reality, it would be as if the Greek gods fully existed and walked in all these fantasies and myths that we have with like the Greek gods and other ancient texts were fully real, were factual, not allegories, not fantasies, not entertainment, but real. And so, for someone with a childlike imagination, like this young boy, this is reality, or he wishes it to be reality. And for other people, it's a fantasy, it's a fairy tale. But regardless, that doesn't matter. There's still lessons to be learned. There's still things that can be discovered about their present day, our reality from that we know that it's not real. We're playing the game, that we are the one reading the book, playing the game, watching the movie, and that no matter what is going on in that fantasy world, we can learn something and take from it. That magic can exist in some ways. Maybe not from a crystal stone where you can light fires, but there's something that you can take away from that. And I think that's the whole message at the end there, is that, it doesn't matter if it really happened or not. The story still remains.
That is super deep.
I know. I'm like, whoa, mind blown. I'm like, I don't even know if I have anything to follow up with that.
And it's very reminiscent of, and I won't spoil this on too much.
This is a spoiler cast. Go ahead.
But the end of the Matrix 3 has that same thing. The end of Mass Effect 3 has that same thing. You get into kind of the extended version of the end of Lord of the Rings, where Sam writes the Lord of the Rings. That you get this same thing, and this repeats in a lot of things. And go back to Game of Thrones, where Sam Whale writes the history of the Game of Thrones. And
Mm.
and if you want to connect it even further with Game of Thrones, the House of the Dragon, the book form of that, which is not called House of the Dragon, exists as a history that someone has written, but there's lines blurred there that they don't. They're like, the legends say that this guy survived this battle, but we really don't know. And so when you watch the show, you get the full, real story behind it. So it all goes back to, in reality, that a lot of times we don't know history. We can make that guess. We can take educated guesses. We can see what logically makes sense. But that doesn't mean that if Medusa existed or not, we can still learn lessons from her story. And that goes for any religion, a religious story, that you can still learn anything from Jesus' story to Muhammad's story to the Buddha to Hindu fables and any stories like that. It doesn't matter if it existed or not, for a lot of people in a lot of circumstances.
Well, it's going to matter to me. Steph, do you think this existed?
I think it did, not because I have any proof or anything like that, but I would like my reality to believe that it had existed. I do like that trope of a character writing what had happened, and I feel like it carries more weight because one of the biggest themes that I took away from it was us humans. We're not meant to have things really more powerful than we can handle, right? I mean, you can see how magic and people who have icons like that could cause colossal damage in the land, and people fight over it, right? There are wars, there's slavery, prejudices, all because we got this extra special power. So it makes me feel like, wow, if we, like in our real Earth right now, all of a sudden some of us had magic, I'm pretty sure what's going to happen will be kind of almost like Final Fantasy in a strange sense. There will be some level of prejudice, whether one way or the other, oppression, wars, people utilizing the magic to destroy each other. So I'd like to think that it did happen. It got obliterated, from that world, Valisthea, and you now see the fruits of Clive and Joshua and everybody's labor, where we now have a non-magic society. So I would
ultimately
Sid's vision coming true.
Yep, he did see that there were going to be hardships, but he honestly believed that it was the better route than letting the crystals drain life out of everyone.
And I think Clive said, and I forgot if it was who he said it to, he says, this is going to be hard. We might not see it in this generation or even the next generation, but something will come eventually. So that's why I feel like, it would mean more to me, just from my perspective, if it was the latter theory block where it had happened and it just was a true historical work that now the people think it as a fairy tale or fiction. Because I'm not a fan of another similar trope of where, this whole thing was a dream. Like if the whole thing was made up. I'm not saying I would hate it. I would still accept it. It's still a way to tell a story. It's just not my favorite. I'd like to think that whatever I spent countless hours on did occur, and the sacrifices of the characters that were made, that sacrifice that they made meant something. So that's what I think. Again, not because I have some firm proof, but more of kind of how I'd prefer to see everything pay out. How about you, Pat?
Of course. No, I think that's definitely good thought into it. Like, honestly, if someone told me that none of that happened, it'd make the whole, for me, the whole 80-hour journey almost feel kind of meaningless. I don't know. That's kind of my opinion. But since we are on this topic of how the game ended, how do we feel? Do we feel like this game ended the way it should? Do we think that, did Clive necessarily have to die? Like, how do you feel about the ending overall?
I
Steph?
think.
Oh,
No,
sorry. Go ahead.
no, it's okay.
Go for it, Block.
I think it certainly works. It's very poetic in a lot of things, that he is this most powerful being that sacrifices himself rather than, and we've already discussed, like, his body may not have been able to handle Ultima's power, even if he accepted it willingly. That the vessel of his body wasn't formed right. Like that part gets muddled. There's a lot of parts that I think do get muddled by the end. That it's not all strings, I think, are fully wrapped up to my satisfaction. But I think for ultimately that Clive choosing to sacrifice himself for the better of humanity is very much like how Sid does. All the Sids that and that's kind of what a hero does. That he's not selfish. He's thinking of the greater goal, and he believes that the greater goal, for that to be achieved, is for him to. He has the ability right then and there, and only then and there, to end this cycle. And it gets very, I think, Eastern thinking of this cycle of suffering, the cycle of this. People are born into sin, into this world of suffering, and he's able to escape that, and giving everyone else a chance to escape that reality as well. I think it just has that. It's not exact to Hindu and Buddhism. But certainly has those markings of those kind of thoughts, especially Buddhism in that sense of a life of suffering, and that suffering being magic, and he's able to release that. So I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Steph, what do you think?
Overall, I was all right with the ending. I wasn't scratching my head going, huh, WTF? I left feeling satisfied for the most part, although I do feel that I also could be fine, and this is more of a preference, right? So hold your horses, everyone. I don't think Clive had to die, but that's just me, and it's not because of his pecs. Only because I've already seen a lot of sacrifice in the game, and for that reason, that if Clive were to live, I wouldn't think of it as a cop-out. Because sometimes people don't like the happily ever after type endings, and I get it. The reason why it made me think of it was, Sid died, and that was a sucker punch to my gut. I love Sid. I'm like, all right, Clive's going to be carrying that torch, and he promised Jill, he promised, damn it, he promised. So it's not a critique of the ending. It's just that I feel that there is some wiggle room where they could have kept them. Like, there was a lot of sacrifices already, but I don't know. The writing's on the wall with the two brothers taking turns almost being dead. I'm like, it's a highly unlikely scenario. Both will come through. Kind of stinks. Did we even see much of Joshua's reaction? I don't know why. I remember Jill's reaction to the news very clearly, right?
Yeah.
Like, I remember the scene. It was very vivid, and I cried. I can't recall if I saw Joshua's reaction. I don't know if it's because either it wasn't there or wasn't memorable enough.
It was. Joshua's reaction wasn't there because we left Joshua unconscious on.
He heals him, and then he carries him out of frame.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see the big crystal kind of disintegrating. And then, Clive wakes up on the beach. So,
okay. All right. So I'm not crazy. I do feel, though, I feel like, the brotherly bond. I kind of wish we kind of could see anything of Joshua, because the post-credit scene had Joshua's name. So I'm like, Jill had a great relationship with Clive. Joshua, like, those are the two people that Clive had the closest connection to, in my opinion. So I feel like...
And Torgal.
Yeah. I feel like Joshua's connection would have been very hurt, especially because Joshua, sacrificed himself for his brother, but then his brother kind of reverts that sacrifice and says, no, you're the one that's going to live for this one.
Yeah. Well, speaking of then, Pat, how about you? How did you feel about the ending?
Overall, it was poetic with the rest of the themes of the game. I'm one of those people, though, that feel like you do not need to kill off the main character all the time, and that seems to be a theme going on now with Final Fantasy, is to end the game, we kill off the main character. I felt really... I guess I felt I didn't like that part because mostly with Jill. I played the side quest that had Jill, and her story of not having trouble relying on people because people always disappear from her life, and then finally finding that stone in Clive, and feeling like she can finally be emotionally attached to something, to be able to feel again because of Clive, and now that's ripped again from her. Mm-hmm. I felt that Jill was unnecessarily just brutalized throughout this entire game. Maybe that's more my personal feelings.
No, I think you're right on that.
Yeah. Drawing out Jill as oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that this theme of a bittersweet ending with a major character, doesn't always have to be the main character, but a major character dying, and it's very dark fantasy. Mm-hmm. Again, back in the realm of Witcher and Game of Thrones, and that's certainly kind of the hot way of doing fantasy stories right now. Even the latest Rings of Power leans more heavily into dark fantasy than high fantasy, or the Amazon Lord of the Rings show.
Mm-hmm.
That's, and I think that goes into it's more real. For a lot of people recognize that they can relate to those kind of emotions, whereas high fantasy, like traditional Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and things, is a lot more feel good, or some religious undertones of things. You get with Narnia, and those kind of things. There's a lot of it that's feel good. And triumphant, and dark fantasy is very gritty, and it hurts.
Yeah. Good point. But I will say, the way they drew Jill's character, it's one of the few romances that I actually want to see play out. Because again, this is an extreme opposite. When you're thinking of the 90s Disney, it's like, oh, live happily ever after. Okay, whatever. No, here I'm like, you know what? I feel like Jill actually deserves it. Again, not criticizing what Square has done. I think the ending is fine, but I'm just saying, I would not have been bothered, because there's still some bittersweet portions. There's still thousands of people that died. Maybe Clive could have been disabled, whatever. I don't want to beat a dead horse. I'm not the writer. I'm not the one that made the story, but I do feel like there is wiggle room to keep in theme, because and this is actually more of a compliment to Square of how well they drew out Jill's character. I actually felt like she deserved more.
I certainly agree that I want to see more of their relationship. And I think there's a lot of positives to that, but also, I'm not happy with how they've done their relationship, because there's so much of it, you go for several years in game, so we don't know where their relationship really stands. You get snippets of things, like that they care about each other. So, but you don't get. It feels unfinished. It feels like there's a lot of things that were cut from that. And Final Fantasy is so well known for having really great romances at times. Especially with like Squall and Renoa, and Tidus and Yuna.
That's the best.
You have, most Final Fantasies, after from 6 onward, have a really good relationship. Some better than others, and this, certainly fits in there. But it feels unfinished to me. I don't think that. I think Jill deserved more and deserved a little bit better throughout the whole game. I think if she would have had more moments in game that really brought her up more, I would be more satisfied with the ending. But as you said, she's there's a lot of moments where she gets knocked down a whole lot. She's beat up a whole lot. She has it rough. And we have her moment in the Iron Kingdom, which is really good. But still, I'm left kind of wanting to see more from her.
That's actually might be a good transition, Pat. Do you think this would be great to start talking about favorite characters?
Well, I was thinking about characters that we'd love to see get beat up.
Oh, that too.
Yeah. The thing about a lot of Final Fantasy games tend to have a very solid antagonist that tends to, rule, like, bother the hero throughout most of the game. However, Final Fantasy 16, even though Ultima was the big bad, it seems like we had multiple antagonists that each kind of took their turn. Whether it be Benedicta in the beginning or whether it be Ultima at the very end, each one kind of had their section of the story. And so, who would you say was probably the best of the antagonists? Steph, why don't we go with you this time?
So, for as far as favorite antagonists, I would say for me between Queen Empress Annabella and Ultima. And I say with the exception of Annabella's death. I just thought it was a cheap way out. It's not out of the realm of realistic possibility for someone to go do that. But she's very Cersei-like in a way that she... right from the first few minutes of the game where she appeared, I hated her guts and how she not only mistreated her son, but she was actually a big player in a lot of what went on in the human part of the realm, even though she wasn't a major antagonist. Like, you didn't fight her, right? She wasn't a boss. So, but I still felt, just if you're talking about villains and heroes, I mean, she was actually quite a fantastic villain that I love to hate. I just wish she had a much worse, more cruel death. So that's why I liked her, is because granted, it's a very extreme version, but I can see people in real life behaving like her, obviously, but to a smaller scale, not an empress or whatever. What she did have real human motivation. They can carry out some pretty evil shit by doing so. Because she can be so real, a person in our world can behave like that, is why I kind of say she's the crown villainess here, even though, again, she plays a minor role, so to speak, in the big picture. And the reason why I like Ultima is not because he's the final big bad, but I did find an interest that, wow, he wasn't like a false god in the game or a pretend to be god. He was literally the god of the game. So I was like, oh, wow, okay. Because I don't really see a lot of that. I see a lot of false gods or people pretending to be a god to manipulate people. No, this is an actual god framed kind of like the Greek gods, right? Not like the Catholicism, Judaism, Islam, where
He did not care about his human race at all. And
Exactly.
That's his fault.
Exactly. So he had faults like Greek gods have faults, because that's kind of what they were known for. So I really dug kind of Final Fantasy's version of a deity that clearly had a fault, was actually very selfish, and just had this master plan, and to see his own creations defy him, it is I don't know. It impressed me. I found it a very, very interesting subject matter. So those are my two favorite villains of the story, even though there's a lot of other great villains. Not a fan of Benedicta and Hugo. I just felt like they're so childish. I just couldn't. Yuck. Someone go next. And sorry if they're your favorite villains.
Well, I certainly agree with Annabella and her personal evil that she hates Clive for who he is, and it's a very personal, very real kind of hatred, and not to dwell on this much, but I relate to it, as someone who was raised by their grandparents, of this feeling of parents, not fully wanting their child or something like that. So it's a very real kind of thing. I think her suicide works just because it plays into her cowardice. That she can't fight, she can't do anything without other people there. When it's just her, she chooses the coward route. She doesn't have the strength to stand judgment. She doesn't have the strength to look Clive in the eye and realize her mistake. She will rather die by her own hand than admit her mistakes. And that everything, her children are not really children to her as much as almost prized possessions, that they are tickets to a greater life and legacy, that through her great children who will be emperors and dukes and dominants and very powerful people, it is through them that her legacy will live on, that she will be written in the books as the mother of these great people. And I think that's what makes her suicide work in this case. It's not satisfying as a viewer. Like, you don't want that. You want her you want a trial, and you want her to suffer in that way. And no, it's very, she's a cowardice. So I think that works. I think Benedicta, there's things I like about Benedicta, and there's things I don't. And I put her in my in this weird category of good character and bad character. And I'll touch on this for a second. That there's something about powerful women, I think, of evil women that is just very alluring, that we like, at least I do, and I think a lot of other people do. There's just something about them, if they're done in the right way, and part of Benedicta's done this way. She's very cat-like in her appearance. She's both very strong and powerful, and she has the long cigarette holder. She's kind of sexy and sultry, but also very cunning and evil. And so for a lot of people, I think that catches you. She's very vain and dangerous, but and she uses her charms and things to her advantage. We see that with the relationships that she has with all of these people. And you have a little bit of a tragic backstory there, where she's an orphan on the streets, and she's a nobody, and she doesn't want to be a bearer. because she knows she has some magic abilities, and she's been in hiding and keeping that a secret. But then she finds out she's a dominant, and suddenly, and we get this strange dynamic in the game where bearers are slaves to be spit upon, and they're dirt, and we'll use them until they're dry and they're dead. But she's a dominant, and she can, win entire wars with her magic. And she's elevated to this place where she can have relationships with the king, with Barnabas. And we see how, in that brief flashback with Sid, before she gets to this prestige, who she was then, and then how that power, that the money, the wealth, the fame, and all of this changes her. But what I don't like, what I think would have made me love her character, and they don't do this, is that when she's stripped of Garuda's power at one point, and you feel how devastated she is, how broken she is, and she wonders, like, how can she even exist without having, like, she's tasted the fruit, and now she can't have that. She's tasted wealth and fame and power. She used to command armies, and now she's nothing. She's going to be, in her mind, like, will she be branded and used as a slave? Or she's just beneath that,
So, yeah, she then just kind of lets her fear, make her lose the absolute control.
And then she gets Garuda back.
Yep.
And, she goes crazy and is destroying everything, and then we kill her.
Yep.
And I think that's what I don't like, is that we don't get that arc. Her arc kind of gets there and it's gone, and so you don't get those answered questions. And then I don't like at all what we get after her death, is that we only see her after that fight in 2, almost 3 occasions. One is that her head gets delivered to Hugo, which I don't understand. Like, why would Sid do that? Or was it Sid? I don't think Sid did, but...
100% that was Barnabas that did that. Barnabas was leaving her. Which is actually going to be my villain of choice here. Just because, like, there's something... Barnabas was one that was always manipulating the scenes from the background, I feel. And then when he finally did step out, we realized just how powerful he was. Like, even though he was driven kind of by a little weird craze and a mother fetish, maybe. Yeah. That was kind of a weird scene, why Ultima appeared as his naked mom. But, it's just something, like, Barnabas was powerful, and he wasn't afraid to show it. Like, he was the one thing that kept his kingdom just absolutely feared by all the other kingdoms, or all the other nations, was his ability to be Odin. So I thought that was pretty cool. Let's see, we got about maybe 15, 20 minutes here. I do want to hit on our favorite icon battles.
Sorry, I had one more point on that. That I think is really important, and I'll make it brief, is that, we get her head sent to Hugo, but then we also see her appear. It's Ultima using her body as a vision, appearing nude to both Hugo and later Barnabas. And it just, for me, it's very, like, they use her body in depth as only to be maimed and unclothed, and to bring out in other men a lust and rage and jealousy all in one. And it feels, I don't want to say sexist, but it uses her in that way, that we view her in that way in death. So I don't like that.
Yeah. No, she probably could have been treated a little better here. So icon ability or icon, big old giant kaiju battles. Let's just kind of do a quick bullet, like
Yeah, quick round robin.
quick round robin. Steph, who was your favorite battle?
My favorite battle was with Titan. With Bahamut being a close second because, dude, that fight in space was just so much. I think as far as an epic standpoint, I do like the one with Bahamut, but as far as like actual gameplay and just enjoyment, I preferred the icon battle with Titan.
Yeah, that was pretty sweet. Just like how huge that battle was, and like just gigantic, and even though you didn't really do too much, like against the Mega Titan or whatever the final Titan form was, it was still
Titan lost, I think is his name.
Yeah, you're like this big.
Play on Atlas lost. I get it. But yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. Black, what was your favorite?
Other than Titan, because that certainly brought to mind like God of War 3 with Kratos against Kronos. You're fighting mountains, essentially. But I think the end battle with Ultimalius, the final form, I think it does good as a final battle in that it's the most complex, dizzying, awe-inspiring visually in the game, and it forces you to use everything that you've learned to that point. And he's throwing all of these different moves. He's changing repeatedly. I think it's a good bookend for the game. And not all games can give a satisfying final boss. I like. It was hard to see what was going on at times. There's way too many. I think this is a point throughout the whole game is that there's just a lot of grandeur, more flash than substance in
Was
part.
that your attack? Was it his attack? It's like,
Yeah, like my wife was watching me, and she was like, "How do you know what's going on?" I was like, "I don't."
It's like I'm looking at the life bar. If mine's going
pretty
down,
much. She's like, "It's great to look at, but I don't know what I'm looking at."
Yeah, that battle might have been too grandeur.
Yeah.
One I thought that was perfect was the Bahamut fight. Just the switching off between Ifrit and Ifrit and the Phoenix as they both try to tackle Bahamut, and then just before Bahamut was about to fail, he absorbs the crystal in him, and then he becomes like the super mega Bahamut, and he flies off into space and is about ready to launch a laser that would absolutely devastate the planet. Like that was actually a pretty like flashy battle, pun intended, because a lot of flashes.
Well, that's just quick tribute. I mean, the whole game, but that battle like made me think this is a next gen game. Holy shit! Like,
fun fact: I think I was told that was the Kingdom Hearts 4 team that did that one.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think I read that too. That the Kingdom Hearts team did most of the icon, or at least had input in most of the icon things.
that's awesome.
So maybe a little something to look forward to in a future Kingdom Hearts game.
Maybe.
All right. Favorite character. Again, we got to be quick on this, but out of all the cast of characters, who might have been your favorite?
Uncle Byron, I think.
Uncle Byron.
Yeah, he's comic relief, but he's still intelligent. He's still noble. He still has a complex backstory. He's not just the stupid friend or
exactly. Yep.
The only thing, and it's probably his funniest scene. Where he chooses to eat instead of fight. In the inn, I don't like it for his character because he's willing to fight at any other time. Why is he going to go hide behind the bar at this point?
True, but I do enjoy just eating.
Yeah, it's funny though. But I liked him throughout.
Yeah.
For me, Uncle Byron was one of them. I did mention Sid. He is the one that I was thirsty for, in my opinion. But believe it or not, I love Gav. There's just something about Gav that constantly grew on me as time, at first I'm like, oh, he's that annoying like friend that won't leave you alone. But like, I don't know, he kind of really grew up. Yeah.
He's Sam and Samwell. He's a little annoying at the start, but he's a true hero.
He's always there for you through thick and thin. He's pretty damn good at his job. He's sniffing out everything, and he's alive through it all. And so next to Jill understanding the loss and mourning the loss of Clive, like I could tell it really hit Gav pretty badly. I love Gav. He's got my heart.
I don't know if you got a chance to play all the side quests. There was one with Gav, and that one was also very touching because Gav's, at the end of it, Gav's like, I'm not you, Clive. I will never be you. Like, what's the point of, me being around? I'm never going to be as awesome and, brotherly. And then Clive's like, no, that's not the point. I don't want you to be me. I want you to be you, Gav. Without you, we wouldn't have been able to do this, 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 and this. Like who was the one that saved us from in the siege of Rosaria? It was Gav. He's who did this? It was you. Like he was like passing on and building up Gav, and it hinted to Gav that if anything happened to Clive, Gav had to be ready to take the leadership of the hideaway.
And Jon Snow and Samwell Tarly had the exact same conversation.
Oh, but yeah,
another Game of Thrones reference. Yeah, this. I love Jill. This Sid was definitely something special. Like there was something very like I was looking for a fault in Sid this entire time. Like, oh, he can't really be that pious and like, but honestly, like even up to the end, it was his goal to make a better world for everyone. That's what he really wanted. Like he had faults that he saw himself, like when he was a soldier in the kingdom of Waloed. He did not enjoy that, and he wanted to like fix the world so that everyone had a chance to live their life the way they wanted to. So I would have to say Sid was probably one of my favorite characters, and Jill, just because her story was tragic, and I'm always a sucker for the tragic stories.
I don't think there was any real bad characters. Like I think most people had, even like the villains. Like I would like to hate them. Like Annabella. Like, of course she's a bad person, but she's written well, I think.
Well, that's the thing. They really fleshed out a lot of their characters.
Even like the super side characters, like Quentin was a character.
Martha and the Dame. Gav is kind of in that, but there's a lot of auxiliary characters.
The ones who weren't the hideaway. Like Quentin had a very interesting story about the whole reason he created his village was just out of pure revenge against this judge. And then when he lost that, it's like he almost lost his purpose in life until Clive's like, hey, you built this village from scratch. You're like one of the best pillars we have to keep society from collapsing. Like, I don't know. There's a lot of good characters here, but I gotta say, this was a very well-written game. Very well written. Well, so we're coming to the end here. I guess overall opinions. Did we like this? Is this how we want Final Fantasy to continue? Like, what would we like to see from the next iteration? Steph?
Well, I probably am not the best person to ask because I have probably played the least amount of Final Fantasy games compared to the both of you. But from the perspective of someone who's more of a new blood when it comes to the franchise, I personally loved it. But that is only because I prefer action-focused RPGs, so it just happened to be kind of my type. Other than that, though, the story was incredible. The characters were memorable. The graphics and the music just hit, and like it truly is a next-gen game. Love it. The downsides is the majority of the side missions were just go down 300 yards and kill some scorpions and bring back whatever. The part with Mid was, I was literally just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I was like, dude, really?
And then you don't even use her flying airship. You ride on Bahamut.
Yeah, so I mean, and that's kind of like a minor thing, right? Because everything else just seemed pretty meaty. I don't mind the linearity. I'm not those people that crap on linear games. I think the only other thing is, even though I like action-focused RPG, maybe they could next game put a little bit more RPG back, right? There's only like a couple slots where you could wear those rings and ability-enhancing things. I don't know if you guys have any other feedback about what other things you could make more RPG-like,
Status effects. And
Yeah.
Yeah, there was no status effects.
And the items
no
are pretty minimal.
buffing.
Yeah.
A core part of an RPG, is being able to customize how your character plays. And there's a little bit of that with the different icons, but you can't be a full magic user. You can't. It's very limiting in that scope.
Yeah, magic almost felt like a second thought. Like there was no reason to use a fire over an ice spell.
No, there were no elemental weaknesses of any sort.
Hit the fire guy with the fire spell. He doesn't absorb it. He's
Same damage. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of my high level. Who's next?
I think I'm currently doing my Final Fantasy Anthology series where I'm playing through all the games again and going into a deep dive on all the games. And gameplay, it doesn't matter to me because each of the games in modern era, from 7 onward, gameplay's tweaked differently with each one of those. 7 plays different from 8. 8 plays different from 9. 9 plays different from 10. 10-2 is not 10. 13's different from those, and 12 is different, and 13-2 is not like 13, and Lightning Returns, which is 13-3, is not like 13-2 or 13. So it doesn't matter if it's action-oriented or not. I think the important thing is that it hits on those core themes, which we've already discussed, which is challenging fate, fighting corrupt authorities, relationships between humanity and magic or technology, the governance of the crystals and elements over things, a little bit of faith discussion of things. All of these are the key elements of Final Fantasy from the very first one. And Final Fantasy XVI is one of the few that hits on all of these in good measure. So I'm hoping that 17, if it's not a online game like 11 and 14, I hope that they continue to try to reinvent, to push the series into another direction gameplay-wise. Unique, but still an RPG, be it action, turn-based, or what have you, but certainly more RPG elements. And I think the action overall, while it's fun to play, I think it's fairly shallow compared to something like Bayonetta and Devil May Cry and God of War and a few other major action games. It's not, it's not as good as the best action games, and it's not enough RPG as some of the action games too. The latest God of Wars are more RPG than Final Fantasy 16.
That is kind of funny. I agree with a lot of your points there, Black. I definitely believe that every Final Fantasy tries to be something a little different, and I hope that they continue to do that. Sorry, all you Final Fantasy naysayers, that this isn't a Final Fantasy game. It's very much a Final Fantasy game, just based on Black's analysis alone. I liked the overall mature story. I hope that maybe they continue to keep the stories mature going forward. I would like to see more party involvement, though. That's something I miss. Even though we had Joshua for a bit, Jill for a bit, Sid for a bit, I would like more characters in the party. I would like to see more character development amongst each other. Like, even though everyone did a great job, I feel like we could have gotten more, but all we really got was Clive's story. And as much as Clive was a cool character, he does not do a whole lot of growth. Like, once he reached that point of I'm Sid, like, his struggles was basically I want to do this by myself versus letting other people in. And like, it just kind of made him very one-sided as a character, in my opinion. So I guess maybe like more of a more solid straight progression instead of one where he progresses too fast. And
Well, yeah, he progressed in like the first third of the game, and then he kind of, I wouldn't say flatline, but he kind of maintained the course. Yeah.
He was still likable, though.
Yeah, no, he definitely, like, the gruff, like, Geralt voice that he had going on the entire time, and like he still had his humor. He was still a very caring but badass character. Like, I just would have liked to see more of it, like his internal struggles spread throughout the game instead of just the beginning.
Yep.
Other than that, I thought the game was amazing. It's probably at least in my top 3 favorite Final Fantasies out there.
It's in the middle for me. It's in the middle.
And it's one of your top 2, Steph?
Yep, it's in my top 2. But I will say, as far as the games that I've played this year, this definitely is high up there. I'm not sure if it'll necessarily win Game of the Year for me, but not because of any of its faults, but just because there are so many great games that came out this year.
Oh gosh, this year has just been massive.
Yeah, but it's so fun. I feel like a lot of people, it's very accessible. I do feel it's accessible for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. All right, guys. Well, I think that concludes this chapter of the Boss Rush Book Club. I'm grateful for Steph and Block to be with me here today to be able to talk about this amazing game. We would like to know what your thoughts are. If you, after you heard this, like, do you agree with our synopsis? What was some of the things you liked about Final Fantasy 16? Where else do you want to see the series go? So, Steph, thank you again. Block, can you let everyone know where we can find you?
It'd be Block's Gaming Reviews on YouTube, Block's Game RVWS on X or Twitter. Mostly on Twitter. I haven't fully jumped ship yet. I'm waiting for an audience on other platforms. But Block's Gaming Reviews or Block's Game RVWS, you'll find me under those two handles. But mostly doing YouTube videos right now. And look forward to continuing my Final Fantasy Anthology series, where I will be doing 4, 5, and 6, and side games released along those times during those.
You doing Mystic Quest?
Doing Mystic Quest, the Final Fantasy Adventure, and these aren't Let's Plays, but looking into the history, looking into the evolution of the series, looking into all the ports, looking into the villains, the heroes, the themes, and all of that makes those games noteworthy. It's kind of a celebration of the series.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's a very heavy undertaking, Block, but we know you can do it. You got a lot of useful and very deep knowledge about the theme.
Appreciate it.
Games. Like, we appreciated your insights here.
Yeah.
So, well, from everyone here at Boss Rush, thank you. Have a great night, and we will see you at the next chapter of Boss Rush Book Clubs.
Woo!
If you want to be a Patreon producer, head on over to patreon.com/bossrushmedia, and find out which tier is right for you. Our Patreon producers at the $5 tier or higher for this month are Adriel Munger, Austin Campbell, Celeste Roberts, Christian S., Sana Dierig, Francisco Santillan, and Rebecca Jewell. Thank you for your continued support.